Every parent wants the best for their child, and UNICEF has come out with a study looking at how well countries are setting up their children for a bright future. It ranks 29 developed countries. Called Report Card 11, the study found child poverty is not inevitable, but that it could be affected by government policies. But it's important to note that the results are based on averages of 5 broad measures and only include data between 2009 and 2010. Now, in the rankings, the Netherlands came out on top, followed by several Nordic countries. And here are some of the poorer performers. The UK came in 16th, Greece came in 25th, and the US right after that. Romania was ranked last, and all had low education scores. Well, let's break this down a little bit more with the report's author. Peter Adamson joins us now live from Oxford in the UK. Peter, thank you very much for being with us. Now, in this study, you looked at issues like material well-being, education, and housing. Now, the Nordic countries of Norway, Finland, and Iceland, they scored very, very high. What is it exactly about these countries that put them at the top?
Well, as you say, the Nordic countries are at the top of almost every league table that we have constructed for child well-being in the world's rich countries. This is not something sudden or new. It has a long tradition. It's clearly based to some extent on the priority and the resources that they give to children in those countries. In other words, they're famous for having a very high level of welfare all round in the countries. Strangely, it does not seem to make their economies less productive. They managed to hold a competitive international stance. Their economies are in at least as good a shape as other industrialized countries, but they do put an awful lot of resources and priority and care into looking after their children. I should add,
sorry to jump in there. So they do put more money into their public programs. I do want to ask you about per capita GDP, because you found no strong connection between per capita GDP and a child's well-being. For example, Portugal scored higher than the U.S. That seems kind of odd, but what does this tell us?
Okay. First of all, it's important to note that we're only talking about comparisons amongst the OECD countries, the world's rich countries. Clearly, if you took the world as a whole, there is a connection between child well-being and GDP per capita. But once a certain level of economic wealth has been achieved, as measured by GDP per capita, that factor seems to matter less and less. So you get these results on our calculation of child well-being, which do show a relatively weak connection, so that the Czech Republic, for example, has a higher level of child well-being than Austria. As you say, Portugal ranks more highly than the United States. Slovenia ranks more highly than Canada. Now, you can quarrel with this league table, but you'd have to quarrel with the individual indicators. And we've been very transparent about that and shown not only the overall index, but each individual indicator. So that, for example, the United States does rank in the bottom third. It's a lowly ranking country in the league table of child well-being. But the individual indicators show the reasons for that. For example, in our first attempt to measure children's relationships, the United States comes 28th out of 29 countries. If we measure another indicator of child well-being, the rate of teenage pregnancy, the United States is bottom, 29th out of the 29
You mentioned that
countries.
we could quarrel about certain indicators. You could quarrel about the countries that were not included, because, as you said, you were looking at developed countries, but you didn't include countries like Japan, Australia, or New Zealand. Why not?
That's purely a matter of data availability. It's very tough. When you're comparing internationally, you have to make sure you're comparing like with like. In other words, that the indicators are based on the same definition and approximately the same time period. And we try, and you'll notice that all the countries we do have all of the EU countries have a common database, so they're all in there as well. And there are some indicators missing for the United States, but to be in the index, we decided that every country had to have at least 75% of our indicators. Australia, Japan didn't make the cut on that. They have other indicators. They're just not comparable with the ones we're using. So it's a data availability question, not a political decision.